Throughout the 20th century, few figures have had as profound an impact on world history as Joseph Stalin. As the leader of the Soviet Union from the mid-1920s until his death in 1953, Stalin reshaped his country and, in many ways, the entire world. Revered by some and reviled by others, his policies, purges, industrialization efforts, and role in World War II left an indelible mark on the course of history. Today, we'll journey through the life and times of Joseph Stalin, separating fact from myth, to explore how his leadership changed the face of the 20th century. If you love exploring history's most influential and controversial figures, make sure to subscribe to History Facts and Mysteries and hit the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into the past. Now, let's step into the complex world of Joseph Stalin. Early life and formative years. Joseph Stalin was born as Iosif Vissarionovich Djugashvili on December 18, 1878, in the small town of Gori in the Russian Empire, modern-day Georgia. His early life was marked by hardship and struggle. Born into a poor family, Stalin experienced a difficult childhood characterized by poverty, strict discipline, and a turbulent family environment. His father, a cobbler, was often violent and alcoholic, while his mother, Ketevan Jaladze, worked tirelessly to support the family and instill in young Iosif a sense of determination and resilience. Despite these challenging beginnings, Stalin showed early promise. As a student at a local church school, he excelled academically, displaying a keen interest in reading and a natural aptitude for leadership. However, his rebellious nature and dissatisfaction with the traditional structure of his society soon led him to radical ideas. Influenced by the revolutionary currents that were sweeping through the Russian Empire, he became involved in political activities at an early age. During his youth, Stalin adopted the pseudonym, Stalin, which means, man of steel. This name would come to symbolize his unyielding character and steely resolve, a persona that would dominate his public life. Even then, the combination of his harsh upbringing and his thirst for power would shape his approach to leadership in the years to come. Revolutionary activity and the road to power. Stalin's early involvement in revolutionary politics began during his student years. He joined various underground groups and participated in activities aimed at undermining the autocratic Tsarist regime. The atmosphere in the Russian Empire was charged with dissent as intellectuals, workers, and peasants sought radical reforms, and Stalin found himself drawn into the struggle against oppression. In the early 1900s, as revolutionary fervor grew, Stalin became actively involved in the Bolshevik faction of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. His organizational skills, cunning, and willingness to operate in secrecy helped him rise through the party ranks. Although many of his early actions were clandestine, they laid the groundwork for his future political career. The 1917 Russian Revolution was a watershed moment. Amid the chaos of World War I and the collapse of the Tsarist regime, the Bolsheviks seized power and promised a new society based on equality and the abolition of class distinctions. Stalin played a supporting role in these events, although it was his later maneuvering within the party that would bring him to the forefront of Soviet leadership. Consolidation of power. The rise of Stalin. After the Bolsheviks took power, a power struggle ensued among the revolutionaries. Figures such as Lenin, Trotsky, and Zinoviev vied for control of the nascent Soviet state. In the years following the revolution, Stalin steadily consolidated power through a combination of political maneuvering, administrative reforms, and ruthless elimination of rivals. One of the key turning points came with Lenin's declining health. Although Lenin had designated a testament warning against Stalin's growing power, those warnings were largely suppressed after Lenin's death in 1924. In the ensuing struggle, Stalin skillfully positioned himself as the indispensable administrator and political strategist. By the late 1920s, he had effectively sidelined his rivals and emerged as the undisputed leader of the Soviet Union. Stalin's consolidation of power was marked by several significant strategies. Meritocratic promotions. He gradually shifted the party structure to reward loyalty and efficiency, allowing him to place his supporters in key positions. Control of the party apparatus. Through the purges and reorganization of the Communist Party, Stalin eliminated dissenters and rivals, ensuring his grip on power was unchallenged. Propaganda and cult of personality. Stalin cultivated an image of infallibility and wisdom, often portraying himself as the heir to Lenin's revolutionary spirit. This cult of personality became a cornerstone of his rule. Industrialization and economic transformation. Once in power, Stalin embarked on an ambitious project to transform the Soviet Union from a predominantly agrarian society into an industrial powerhouse. His economic policies were characterized by a focus on rapid industrialization, centralized planning, and collectivization of agriculture. The 5-year plans. Stalin introduced the concept of 5-year plans to mobilize the nation's resources toward achieving industrial and military strength. These plans set aggressive targets for the production of steel, coal, machinery, and other key industries. Rapid industrial growth. Factories were built at an unprecedented pace, and the production output of the Soviet Union increased dramatically during this period. Infrastructure expansion. Massive projects, including the construction of railroads, power plants, and urban housing, reshaped the Soviet landscape and created a new industrial class. Military modernization. The increased industrial capacity was not only aimed at boosting the economy but also at modernizing the military. The arms race with potential adversaries made industrial growth a national priority. While these policies led to significant advancements, they also came with a heavy human cost. The rapid industrialization effort was accompanied by harsh working conditions, forced labor, and widespread shortages. Despite these challenges, the transformation of the Soviet economy under Stalin remains one of the most remarkable feats of modern economic planning. Collectivization and agricultural reforms. Stalin's vision for the Soviet Union also extended to agriculture. The government embarked on a campaign to collectivize farmland, consolidating small, privately owned plots into large, state-controlled farms. Centralized control. Collectivization was designed to boost agricultural productivity and ensure a stable supply of food to support the growing urban population. Resistance and tragedy. However, this policy met with significant resistance from the peasantry. Forced collectivization led to widespread famine and suffering, most notably the Holodomor in Ukraine, where millions of people died. Long-term impact. Despite the initial hardships, collectivization reshaped rural life in the Soviet Union, paving the way for the state's control over the economy and establishing a model that would persist for decades. The Great Purges and political repression. One of the darker aspects of Stalin's rule was his systematic campaign of political repression, commonly known as the Great Purge. Beginning in the late 1930s, this campaign targeted perceived enemies of the state, ranging from political rivals and military leaders to ordinary citizens, through mass arrests, show trials, and executions. Purges and the elimination of rivals. Stalin's purges were driven by paranoia and the desire to eliminate any potential threat to his authority. Political purges. Prominent figures within the Communist Party, including members of the Old Guard and reform-minded officials, were accused of disloyalty or conspiracy. Many were executed or sent to labor camps. Military repressions. Even experienced military leaders were not spared. The purges decimated the ranks of the Red Army at a time when the threat from Nazi Germany was on the horizon, leaving the Soviet military weakened and disorganized. Societal impact. The pervasive fear and mistrust that resulted from the purges had a profound effect on Soviet society. Families were torn apart, and the constant threat of arrest instilled a climate of terror that stifled innovation and dissent. The role of secret police and surveillance. The NKVD, Stalin's secret police, played a central role in enforcing the purges. Their extensive network of informants and ruthless methods ensured that even minor infractions or perceived disloyalty could result in severe punishment. Show trials. Publicized trials, often with predetermined outcomes, served to intimidate the population and reinforce the idea that no one was safe from the regime's scrutiny. Labor camps. Millions were sent to the Gulag system, a sprawling network of labor camps where conditions were brutal and mortality rates were high. Long-term effects. The legacy of the purges left scars on Soviet society that persisted long after Stalin's death, influencing the way subsequent generations viewed government authority and individual rights. The role of propaganda and cult of personality. Stalin was a master of propaganda. He understood that control of information was essential for maintaining power. Through a carefully cultivated image, he transformed himself into the great leader and a near-divine figure in the eyes of the Soviet people. Cultivating an image. Art and literature. Stalin's regime controlled the arts and used them to project an image of strength, wisdom, and benevolence. Statues, paintings, and films depicted him as the embodiment of Soviet ideals. Public ceremonies. Mass rallies, parades, and public displays of loyalty reinforced the idea that Stalin was the unassailable leader of the nation. Education and media. From school textbooks to daily newspapers, all forms of media were harnessed to glorify Stalin's achievements and present his rule as a golden era of progress and stability. World War II and Stalin's role on the global stage. When World War II erupted, Stalin's Soviet Union played a pivotal role in the defeat of Nazi Germany. Despite the earlier purges that had weakened the military, the Soviet war effort became one of the decisive factors in turning the tide of the conflict. The Eastern Front. A battle of attrition. Operation Barbarossa, 1941. The German invasion of the Soviet Union was initially devastating. However, the vastness of Soviet territory and the harsh winter conditions eventually stalled the German advance. Key battles. Battles such as Stalingrad and Kursk were turning points. The Battle of Stalingrad, in particular, symbolized the Soviet capacity for resilience and sacrifice. Scorched earth policy. The Soviets employed a scorched earth policy, destroying infrastructure and resources as they retreated, thereby denying the enemy vital supplies and forcing them into a prolonged and costly engagement. Stalin as a military leader. Stalin's role during World War II is complex. While many of his earlier decisions contributed to the purges that weakened the military, his leadership during the war demonstrated a capacity to adapt and mobilize the vast resources of the Soviet state. Strategic decision-making. Stalin worked closely with military commanders like Zhukov and Rokossovsky, making critical decisions that eventually led to the encirclement and defeat of German forces. Mobilization of the economy. Under his leadership, the Soviet Union transformed its economy to support the war effort. Factories were repurposed to produce tanks, aircraft, and munitions, and millions of citizens contributed to the industrial output necessary for victory. Diplomatic maneuvers. Stalin also engaged in complex diplomacy with the Allied powers, negotiating with leaders like Franklin D. Roosevelt and Winston Churchill. These relationships, though fraught with tension, were crucial for the eventual defeat of the Axis powers. The aftermath of victory. The victory on the Eastern Front came at an enormous human and economic cost. The Soviet Union lost millions of lives, and entire cities lay in ruins. Yet, the sacrifices made during the war also propelled the USSR into the ranks of the world's superpowers, fundamentally altering the global balance of power. The legacy of Stalin's rule. Stalin's reign, lasting nearly 3 decades, left a legacy that continues to provoke debate among historians and the public alike. His policies of industrialization, collectivization, and the purges reshaped Soviet society, with impacts that reverberated long after his death in 1953. Economic and industrial transformation. Under Stalin's leadership, the Soviet Union underwent a rapid transformation from an agrarian society into an industrial giant. Industrialization. The 5-year plans drove the construction of factories, railroads, and power plants. By the end of his rule, the USSR had become one of the world's leading industrial nations. Modernization of agriculture. Although the forced collectivization of agriculture resulted in widespread suffering and famine, it also laid the groundwork for a centralized, state-controlled agricultural system that would define Soviet rural life for decades. Social reorganization and state control. Centralization of power. His purges and repressive policies eliminated much of the old elite, replacing them with loyal supporters who would enforce the regime's policies. Surveillance and repression. The establishment of the NKVD, later the KGB, created a climate of fear that stifled dissent and ensured that the state's narrative remained unchallenged. Cultural and educational reforms. Propaganda was a key tool in reshaping public perception. Educational curricula and state-sponsored media promoted an image of Stalin as the wise and benevolent leader who was steering the nation toward a bright future. Stalin's legacy remains one of the most controversial in modern history. Hero or tyrant? In Russia and among some segments of the former Soviet bloc, Stalin is sometimes revered for his role in industrializing the nation and winning World War II. Yet, for many others, he is remembered as a brutal dictator responsible for the deaths of millions through famine, purges, and forced labor camps. Historiographical shifts. Modern historians continue to debate the true impact of Stalin's rule. While earlier narratives often painted him in a purely negative light, recent scholarship has sought a more nuanced view that recognizes both his contributions and the immense human cost of his policies. Legacy in popular culture. Stalin's image continues to appear in films, literature, and political discourse. His life serves as a powerful reminder of how the pursuit of power can transform a nation, and the price that transformation often exacts. The human cost of Stalin's policies. Perhaps the most enduring and tragic aspect of Stalin's legacy is the human cost of his policies. The rapid industrialization and collectivization efforts led to widespread suffering that still resonates today. Collectivization and famine. Forced collectivization was implemented to bring agriculture under state control, but it led to widespread resistance among the peasantry. The Ukrainian famine, Holodomor. Perhaps the most infamous tragedy was the Holodomor in Ukraine, where millions perished due to starvation. The policies of forced grain requisition and the disruption of traditional farming practices resulted in a humanitarian catastrophe. Long-term social effects. The trauma inflicted by such policies has left lasting scars on the collective memory of affected regions. Families were torn apart, and entire communities struggled to recover from the catastrophic loss of life and livelihoods. The Great Purge and political repression. Stalin's purges resulted in the imprisonment, torture, and execution of countless individuals. Targeting the intellectuals. Many of those who opposed Stalin's policies, including intellectuals, military leaders, and party officials, were branded as enemies of the state. Impact on society. The climate of fear created by these purges stifled innovation and dissent, leaving a legacy of mistrust that would linger for generations. Forced labor camps, gulags. Millions were sent to the Gulag system, where inhumane conditions led to further loss of life. The scale of this repression is staggering and remains one of the darkest chapters in human history. Thank you for joining us on this in-depth exploration of Joseph Stalin's life, his transformative policies, and the enduring legacy of his rule. If you enjoyed this journey into one of history's most complex figures, please subscribe to History Facts and Mysteries and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest explorations.